The phone was only supposed to fill the 2 minutes before bed. You checked one app, maybe answered nothing, looked at a few posts, and then suddenly it was 25 minutes later and you were still there, still moving your thumb, even though nothing on the screen was really doing much anymore. That is the part that matters. A lot of people do not keep scrolling because the feed is still interesting. They keep scrolling after interest is already gone, which means the behavior is often being powered by something other than enjoyment. From the outside, it looks like entertainment. Underneath, it often behaves more like avoidance. People usually explain this in the simplest way possible. The apps are addictive, attention spans are ruined, nobody has discipline anymore. And yes, the design matters. Infinite feeds are built to keep people moving. But design alone does not explain why one person can look for a few minutes and leave, while another keeps going long after the good part is over. That difference often starts before the phone even comes out. It starts in the state the person is already in. A lot of endless scrolling begins in very ordinary transition moments. After work, when the apartment gets quiet, in the car before going inside, in the kitchen while waiting for the microwave, on the couch when a show ends and there's nothing between one part of the night and the next, in bed when the day is technically over but your mind has not actually arrived there yet. Those moments look empty from the outside, but they are often carrying more internal friction than people realize. That is why the phone tends to appear right there. Not always in a dramatic crisis, usually in a thin, forgettable moment that already feels slightly uncomfortable. After a weird text, after a small social disappointment, after seeing someone else's evening look warmer, fuller, more finished than your own, after a boring meeting, after an awkward pause at dinner, after a long day when your body is home but your nervous system still feels somewhere else. The phone enters that gap fast because it gives the mind somewhere to go before it has to feel where it already is. That is why people can keep scrolling even when the content is mediocre, repetitive, or openly annoying. At that point, they aren't really chasing pleasure anymore. They're delaying contact. Contact with silence, contact with their own thoughts, contact with the low mood that was sitting underneath the distraction the whole time. For some people, scrolling is less about stimulation than it is about deferral. It delays boredom, yes, but it also delays recognition. It delays the moment you notice that you are lonely, irritated, drained, restless, disappointed, or just vaguely wrong in a way you don't want to name yet. A feed is almost perfect for that kind of avoidance because it gives the mind something to touch without asking it to stay anywhere for very long. Every post interrupts the last one. Every new face, joke, argument, headline, outfit, recipe, or reaction creates movement without resolution. You never settle long enough to fully feel where you are. That is one reason scrolling can feel active without feeling meaningful. It keeps the brain busy and the self postponed. People say they were on their phone to relax, but a lot of them don't come away rested. They come away scattered, a little emptier, a little noisier, more mentally full and less emotionally clear. Real rest usually has some kind of bottom to it. Even passive rest has a point where the mind starts to settle into where the body already is. Scrolling often does not. It keeps you slightly alert, slightly open, slightly available to the next thing. The mind never fully lands. And part of what makes that so powerful is that the phone can start replacing something people barely notice they need: a transition. Not a huge dramatic transition, just a small internal shift between one state and another, between work and home, between being around people and being alone again, between stimulation and silence, between the end of the day and actual rest. A lot of people don't realize how much emotional friction lives inside those small crossings. They think they're just checking their phone in the hallway, in the parking lot, in bed, in the line at the grocery store, on the couch after dinner. But often, what they are really doing is avoiding the unstructured second when one version of the day ends and another begins. That second can feel strangely exposed. Without the feed, you feel the stress you carried home. You feel how flat the apartment sounds after being around people all day. You feel the drop after distraction. You feel the question of what the night actually is when nothing is actively happening inside it. And that's where the behavior becomes more psychologically interesting than it looks. Scrolling becomes a synthetic transition. Instead of fully arriving anywhere, the person keeps themselves suspended between states, not fully working, not fully resting, not fully alone, not fully present. They stay in motion so they don't have to feel the emotional weight of arrival. That suspended feeling is one reason the habit can last so much longer than the content deserves. There's also a social layer to this that makes the pattern even stickier. A feed is not just content, it's status, comparison, belonging, exclusion, attraction, performance, intimacy, and constant low-level evidence that other people appear to be somewhere else. Even if you are not consciously comparing yourself, your mind is still registering the signals. Who looks loved? Who looks confident? Who has plans? Who has people around them? Who looks effortless? Who seems to belong naturally to a life you're only visiting through glass? So the feed ends up doing two jobs at once. It distracts you from yourself, and it quietly changes how you feel about yourself while you're there. That is one reason the habit can feel so sticky. It doesn't only help people avoid boredom, it also keeps reopening identity questions in small, manageable doses. Am I behind? Am I wasting my life? Why does everyone else look more certain? Why does their evening look complete while mine feels paused? Of course, not everyone scrolls for exactly the same reason. Some people have trained their attention to need constant novelty. Some are exhausted and want the easiest escape possible. Some are lonely but not ready for actual contact. Some find silence too revealing. Some are trying to avoid the heavier feeling that shows up when nothing is happening and there's nowhere else to go. But underneath those different versions, the move is often the same. The thumb keeps moving so the mind doesn't have to stop. And once the phone starts functioning that way, it becomes more than entertainment. It becomes a buffer between moments, a filler for transitions, a shield against mental contact, something you reach for not because it's especially good, but because it helps you avoid the second after. That is why the hardest moment is often not the middle of the scroll. It's the second right after you stop. That small empty second can reveal everything the feed was covering. Tension in the body, sadness in the room, unfinished thoughts about tomorrow, a relationship that feels slightly off, the sense that the day passed but you never really arrived inside it. People think they are avoiding boredom. Sometimes they're avoiding recognition. And the more a person lives in fast fragments, the harder, slower emotional reality can start to feel. Waiting feels longer, silence feels sharper, a normal evening feels underpowered. One unresolved thought starts sounding louder than it actually is. That deepens the cycle. The person scrolls because stillness feels uncomfortable. Then the scrolling makes stillness even harder to return to. So the next quiet moment feels even more resistant, which makes the phone even more necessary. It can look like preference from the outside, but little by little, it becomes dependence on interruption. And there's one more reason the habit is so seductive. The feed lets a person stay near life without fully entering it. You can watch people flirt, travel, joke, eat, cook, announce things, complain, win, reveal, celebrate, and keep moving. You get proximity without participation. That's powerful for people who feel tired, guarded, uncertain, or quietly disappointed with where they are. Watching is easier than choosing. Refreshing is easier than deciding what the evening actually needs. Looking at movement is easier than making contact with your own stillness. So a person can stay in the feed long after interest is gone, not because the feed is good, but because real contact feels heavier. When you see that, the habit stops looking shallow. It starts looking like a small modern ritual of emotional postponement. Not dramatic, not evil, just costly. Because the price of never fully leaving the feed is that you never fully arrive anywhere else either. What looks like mindless scrolling is often something more specific than that. It's a person trying to delay the full weight of coming back to their own life. They're not always looking for content. Sometimes they're just trying to not feel the room for one more second.